Floating lanterns. Oh. Hey everybody, happy Sunday. It's another magical movie review day for us here at our house. For those of you who haven't been around for a while or haven't seen one of my magical movie reviews before, every Sunday is what I call Streaming Sunday. Yeah, Streaming Sunday! I have two cats, Tina, the big orange fluffy one, and Felix, the little tiny gray one, either of which might make an appearance. The tiny one, Felix, is probably gonna yell a lot, and it's either he yells in here or scratches up my carpet at the door. So every Sunday, Streaming Sunday, we watch a movie and we talk about it. Watching movies and kind of talking about how I feel about them is one of my favorite pastimes. So specifically around, of course, Disney and Harry Potter movies. So the series that we're currently in is for Disney Princess films. Last off, we ended at The Princess and the Frog, which was released in 2009. And then this week, we are watching Tangled, which was released in 2010. I've been going over this a lot, and I've watched other YouTubers who do movie reviews, and I've listened to a few podcasters that do movie reviews, and just kind of to see what I can learn from the people that are doing things so well right now. Of course, I don't want to copy anybody. Anything that they own is what they own. That's great. But I also realized that a lot of movie reviews that like came up as popular in my searches are only like 5 minutes long, and they basically just do a recap of the movie, and half of it is the actual film strip. So that's not what you're getting yourself into. This is definitely an in-depth review. I do a quick magical recap where I deliver you the plot of the story as quickly as I can. Then we go into magical moments, things that are really special to me, or moments that really hit home while watching the movie. We also talk about Enchanting Efforts. Try to keep it positive here at Magical Movie Review. So these aren't necessarily things that I don't like or bad things about the movies, because for the most part I've loved all of them. But these are things that leave big question marks over my head, or are things that I thought could have been done better. And then I always pick a VMP, which is a very magical person. I end everything with what I call my nerd alert, which is where I dive into the origin story, which has been my favorite part of these magical movie reviews so far. So definitely stick around for that if you're a nerd like me. We will jump right in to our magical movie review of Disney's Tangled. So we'll start with the magical recap. Again, just delivering you the highlights of the movie as quickly as I possibly can. Yes, I did write it down. This time I didn't really practice, so we'll see what we get here. Old lady sings to a glowing flower. The queen finds the flower and eats it. Maybe. She has a baby that also now has glowing hair when you sing to her. Old lady steals the baby to keep her in a tower forever and makes her call her mother. Skip ahead 18 years. We learn it's Rapunzel and she's bored AF in the tower. She wants to see the floating lights, but mother knows best and won't let her go. Flynn Rider is running from the man because he stole some shit and stumbles upon the tower where Punzi knocks him out with a frying pan. They make a deal to go see the lights. They meet lots of friends along the way, but make it to the lights. Mother intervenes and makes sure Punzi thinks it's all a lie. But once she's back home, Punzi realizes that she's the lost princess that the floating lanterns are for. Mother locks her up again. Flynn tries to save her, but ends up getting shanked. And as he's dying, he cuts off Punzi's hair, and Mother trips and falls out of the window. Punzi cries on Flynn's face, and then all of a sudden he's magically whole again. They go home to the king and queen and live happily ever after. I thought that was okay. I think that's a one and done kind of take, because I just really don't have it in me to try 50 times. That one was harder to, I mean, they other than the Disney classics like Snow White was weirdly easy to do the magical recap of. Sleeping Beauty was easy to do. Cinderella was up there too, but after that it starts getting a little bit more complicated. All the plot lines that start like flowing in, and there's so many different things, and of course there's lots of characters that I find really entertaining that are left out of the magical recap, and oh, it gets weird. So we're doing the best we can. Just jumping right into some of my magical moments. The animation in Tangled is absolutely beautiful. I'm incredibly entranced by Rapunzel's hair every time. Like it's silky smooth. It's like a character all on its own, and I think that has a lot to do with the animation and how it's made. So Rapunzel's hair just throughout the movie is a magical moment for me. Pascal, as like her little animal sidekick, is sassy. He's dynamic in that not only just as a really good animation, there's also just like the colors that he changes into when he's feeling certain emotions. Like, he's fiercely loyal to Rapunzel, so just like his little personality is fiery yet heartened, like he's soft on the inside. So I love Pascal so much, even from the first moment when we saw him on the screen, like playing hide and seek and trying to blend in with the flower pot, was absolutely adorable. So I think he's just a magical character all on his own. And speaking of animal sidekicks, Maximus is fantastic. I think that it really shows the human animal friendship that we can have, even while he's still with like the army for the most part. So like the commander of the group that's trying to chase Flynn Rider, the horse is also like the commander of the other horses and like telling them like, we about to catch this mother. So like he kind of takes on the personality of the owner that he has and his caretaker. And I think that that reigns true in our real lives, right? Like all of our pets that we own like may have a personality on their own, but they also kind of adopt the nature and the attitude of the person that takes care of them. Specifically, the moment that really melted my heart was when Maximus finally catches up with Flynn Rider in the woods, and he's like trying to tear him apart, tear him away from Rapunzel. And Rapunzel just starts talking so sweet to him, and he just melts, and he like wags his tail like a dog and is just immediately entranced by her. I just thought was such a cute moment to see that breakdown from like this hard-ass horse that we've been watching this entire movie all of a sudden just be like totally like heart melted by this girl that he's just met. Flynn Rider too, I just think he's just so incredibly entertaining to watch. He has so many one-liners that it's ridiculous. I also just really like that the Prince Charming, or the man that's the love interest in the story, is like the bad guy, like, or what society up until this point has deemed the bad guy in their story. Like, he's always wanted dead or alive, like he's a thief and he knows it, like he accepts that about himself, and yet has so many layers to his story that we learn about how he was an orphan and how he kind of like created this persona for himself to get him and his friends through like tough times, and then that just kind of spilled into like his adult life. I just really enjoyed there being that twist. So as another magical moment being like, okay, of course we know that the unlikely duo that has to take an adventure together is going to ultimately end up falling in love. Like, we just saw that with Princess and the Frog. Like, that's kind of like tale as old as time here, no pun intended. When we realize that it's the guy that we wouldn't typically choose for a Disney princess. Like, he's not already a prince, he's not a good guy, but they fall in love because of just who they are as people. All these crazy things that he learns about Rapunzel too, like she's got crazy glowing hair and she's kind of a weirdo because like she's been in a tower by herself almost her entire life. Like, of course, like he reacts to it strongly, but he ultimately accepts her for who she is because she's so incredibly accepting of other people. So I just think that their relationship is magical, in itself. Which, speaking of like their pinnacle romance scene, some glitter fell off my face. Let me see if I can put it back or accidentally take off more glitter. I think it's back on there. When they get to the village, or the kingdom rather, and they spend the day together, and then they go out on the boat, and then they sing "At Last I See the Light." I got goosebumps. Like, that doesn't happen to me very often. I'm definitely not what I would say like a movie crier, although I've always said that, but I've noticed as I've gotten older, like especially in the last 3 or 4 months, I have started to like tear up at almost every movie that has like this kind of scene in it. Of course, I'm not crying at comedies or anything, and I'm not like bawling my eyes out except when I'm watching Avengers Endgame, but I just got goosebumps when like you see first the king and the queen like getting ready to go out and light the lantern, and the king is the one crying. That's a magical moment all in itself, because typically the woman is the one crying and the men are the ones that are like consoling the women, but in this case it's the opposite. Like, that's such a powerful moment. I think often gets overlooked because it's such a small part of the movie, but the king is this big burly dude, and the fact that he's like crying because it's been 18 years and they haven't found her yet, and the mother is the one that's like being grounded and comforting him. Magical. So they light the lantern, and then the other lanterns start cascading to light. In my mind, because it starts like at the castle, and then the big crowd starts lighting theirs, and then it's like a trail off from that the lanterns are starting to light. And to me, that is a direct like association to Rapunzel's hair, like without them even knowing what she really looks like now and that she has long hair. Like, they've kind of made a trail of her glowing hair because she is the sun, and I just think that there's like a whole bunch of symbolism in there that's like super magical. So then you cut to them, the two lovebirds in the boat, and like he's just staring at her because he loves her clearly so much, and she's just like putting flowers in the water, like being her cute ass self. And then they see the lanterns, and just from that moment on, I'm just like so absorbed into the movie with the lanterns floating everywhere. And it's so hard to explain because the lanterns flying, like you would think it's just something easy to draw. Somehow I felt like in it, like they made it so incredibly 3D, if that makes any, like it's clearly not 3D because you're not wearing the goggles and you're not like immersed in it, but it felt like it. And then their song together was just so beautiful, and I think very symbolic of themselves. Like, they've always believed one thing about themselves, Flynn being like the bad guy thief, Rapunzel being like the girl that's locked in the tower, being super afraid of everything, and at last they see the light of who they truly are and accepting of each other. I think it's just a beautiful moment, whether it's romantic love, friendship love, or just self-love, like understanding who you are as a person, and at last I see who I really am supposed to be. I'll post the articles that I can go back and find, kind of like subtext that the LGBTQ community have taken and love Rapunzel, because a lot of it is about accepting who you are and having allies and other people that accept you for who you are. And I honestly, of course, being a heterosexual female, like I never really thought about it that way. And then once I read these articles of people who see it in this light, it made it that much more special to me, because that's the beautiful thing about storytelling. There's so many interpretations of how it can be, that like as long as you find the beauty in it on your own, like how incredible is that? Like I thought that was a magical moment all in itself. So, and going into, so backtracking a little bit, because I kind of wrote them in order of like just things that I was thinking about. Okay, so as wonderful as this camera is and takes great quality pictures and videos, has a terrible battery life, so I had to stop really quick. So if I didn't get the frame quite right, I apologize. Jumping right back into magical moments, I love the sequence of I've Got a Dream, and very much for the same reasons why I love Flynn Rider's character so much. It's just giving more dynamic to the different characters within the story. Of course, the good guys are the good guys, but the bad guys are also good guys, which is something that is not very popularized, especially in Disney movies. Like, so it kind of gives you the level of like cheering for the bad guy, but then you've got the bad guy of the bad guys, and they're all singing songs about like what their lifelong dreams are. Some want to be pianists, some just want to find true love, which is, again, is not something that we're used to like men really seeking out in movies. It was definitely entertaining to watch and refreshing. I would definitely say the movie as a whole is one of my favorites. Of course, really at this point, they're almost all one of my favorites. Going into Enchanting Efforts, and there's going to be a Tina tale here in a second, so just be wary. The hair thing for Enchanting Efforts, I love Rapunzel's hair, and I love how shiny it is and how it's a character on its own, but when she's not in the tower, all I can think about is how dirty her hair is. Like, it's scraping on the ground in the woods, it's running around on the ground in this dirty pub that they're in, just in that nasty water, and nobody thinks to tie it up until they actually get to the kingdom, into the like really thick braid that she wears around. And I'm like, oh, what a great idea. When she's been living by herself for 18 years, you would think that she would have thought to teach herself how to braid hair to like help with this issue. While I love her hair, that part of the movie just really bugged me, just like how she didn't think to tie it up once she actually like got outside, and like how dirty it had to be, because she was going from like brushing it every day to like running around in the woods like a squirrel. And along the lines of like hair, I don't know if this is necessarily an enchanting effort just for Tangled. It made me realize it when, I don't even think it was at the beginning of the movie necessarily. I think maybe when like Rapunzel is first trying to convince Mother Gothel to let her go. It's always been the long blonde hair is the beautiful woman, and then any bad character or like ugly character has crazy like frizzy curly hair, which seems disheartening for someone who also has crazy wavy whatever it wants to do kind of hair. It would be nice for a change, which I know that it's coming up when we get to Brave, but for the heroine or the most beautiful girl to have like the kind of crazy curly hair. And then to that effect too, like, I don't know how else they would have done it, and it wasn't necessarily done in a bad way, but when Flynn cuts Rapunzel's hair off to like cut off the magic supply, it goes from being blonde to being brown. So brown equals like not magical in this case. They didn't really necessarily say like, oh, because now like she has brown hair, she's not beautiful, but like there's magic taken away from her, and it was going from blonde to brunette. Like, I don't know, like being a brown haired girl, like you don't really see very many brown haired, like other than Belle, which is another reason why I loved her so much. You don't really have very many brown haired Disney princesses, and so I don't know, I feel like that could have been done differently, and it's not really something that's gonna cause me to hate the movie. It was just something that I thought of while I was watching it. And then really the only other thing that I could think of as far as an enchanting effort, and I noticed it, or I thought about it this time, and Adam made a comment the last time we watched it, because it actually wasn't that long ago, was in the end when she is brought back to the tower by Mother, she's laying in her bed and she's got the like cloth from the fair that has the sun on it, the king and queen's emblem. She like looks at the ceiling and then she's like cocking her head to the side, and you're zooming in, and clearly we all know at this point, like if you've seen the movie before, that like the spaces in between all of her paintings, or incorporated in her paintings her entire life, have included this sun emblem. Honestly, it wasn't obvious enough, and maybe that's the point, that like when they zoomed in on it, I could not see the sun, and still can't to this day until they like highlight it or blast it with that yellow color to really highlight it. It kind of felt like a stretch, or maybe the purpose is that she's the only one that can see it. I don't know. It just seems like kind of a funky, like, oh, they just flipped a switch and now the princess realizes who she is. Like, it just wasn't that exciting of a revelation, in my opinion. So that's it for Enchanting Efforts. Definitely, clearly a lot more magical moments than Enchanting Efforts, as are most of the Disney princess films so far. Last thing before we get to the nerd alert, I always like to pick a BMP for my favorite character or most magical character throughout the film. I think the obvious choice would have been Rapunzel, and while I love her character and it's nice to see like a goofball princess, I ultimately went with Flynn Rider because it is such a change for a prince character. It gives little boys something to look up to too, where they're just like regular people and they can be royal if they want to be. And I just think because he had so many layers to his character that it was just really great to watch those layers unfold. So I thoroughly enjoyed him as my VMP. Funny, handsome for a character. The smolder thing kills me every time, so definitely gonna stick with him. So I lied. There's one more thing that I do before I get to my nerd alert, is I go ahead and I rank the movies and do a reminder of what all my rankings are so far. Out of, how many have we done so far? So this is our 10th magical movie review, which is bananas to me. I'm keeping Beauty and the Beast at the top, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Princess and the Frog, Tangled, Mulan, Cinderella, Pocahontas, Snow White, and Sleeping Beauty. So Tangled is pretty much smack dab in the middle with Mulan. I did originally put Tangled before The Princess and the Frog. I went back and forth on that one, but I think I ultimately went with Princess and the Frog above Tangled because of the soundtrack. While Tangled has At Last I See the Light and I've Got a Dream, like those are really the only like big ones, whereas Princess and the Frog has like 4 or 5 big ones. Like, I love all the films, but it's really usually coming down to the soundtrack is the deciding factor if I'm flip-flopping back and forth between any of these movies. Alright, so thank you so much for sticking around for the magical movie review. I won't blame you if you want to jump off here. That's fine. That's really the end of the movie review itself, because now we're diving right into the nerd alert, which is where we kind of talk about the origin story and the differences between the origin and the Disney adaptation and just general feelings about the story itself. Now, of course, just like almost all the Disney princess movies so far, this is coming from a Brothers Grimm story, the main storybook that came out in 1812. And I would say that this is a relatively popular story. I think most everybody has heard the story of Rapunzel. And so it's interesting to see why Disney decided to call it Tangled. I poked around a couple articles and I'd heard this before as well, and I don't know how true it is, and if anybody does know, definitely put a comment below. I heard that Disney decided to call it Tangled because they wanted it to appeal to all genders. I can appreciate that about Disney with wanting to title the film something more like gender neutral, because if that is what it takes to get everybody in the door to watch it, then they realize what a good film it is and how inspiring it can be for both little girls and little boys, or anybody that doesn't know, or anybody that doesn't feel like they need to be put into a particular box. So that was one thing that I noticed right away, of course, as soon as the movie came out. The way that the movies start are very different. So of course, in the Disney adaptation, the king and queen are longing for a child, but they can't have one, and then they just find this flower in the woods, and it helps bring her fertility. Cool. In the Brothers Grimm story, there's a man and a wife who both, of course, long to have a child that can't. They're living their lives in their house, and the house is kind of backed up to this garden guarded by a wall that has a weed or a flower of some kind that is called Rapunzel. And the wife is like looking at the window and starts just like longing for this flower, and she's like, I have to eat it or I'm gonna die. I can absolutely appreciate that sensation. There's been days and times in my life where I'm like, I have to eat right now or murder will happen. But of course, there's a pickle there, because the garden surrounded by the wall is, it belongs to an old enchantress who also they refer to as Dame Gothel. So there's a connection there between the Disney movie and the original stories, that the enchantress or the bad guy in the story is called Gothel. The husband decides to go over the wall. He gets caught by the enchantress, and he tells the enchantress what happens, or what happened, like my wife has to eat this, or like she says she's gonna die, and she's like, oh, you know what, like she can have it if you promise to give me your firstborn child. And apparently, like without any hesitation, he was just like, okay, that's fine, you can have her. So of course, time goes by, they have a child. The day that the child is born, the enchantress comes by, she names her Rapunzel, and then runs off with her. Puts her in a tower, so that's very on brand with the Disney version. Locks her up there, no stairs, nothing, no doors other than the window. And of course, anytime the enchantress wants to see Rapunzel, she says, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. So that's also included in the Disney adaptation, that Mother Gothel has to have Rapunzel bring her up into the tower. The other thing that I noticed specifically when they were talking about the enchantress, like how she got up, they mentioned that there's a hook outside the window, and Rapunzel uses that to drape her hair to like be able to pull Mother or Dame Gothel up. Which, as soon as I read that part, I immediately remembered that there's a hook outside the window in the Disney story. So they included that as well, not just like throwing her hair over and pulling her up. Time goes by. They do this whole routine. The enchantress takes care of Rapunzel. Rapunzel's just kind of like happy living in her tower. But she gets bored, so she'll sing to herself from time to time, which is not uncommon for any of us Disney princesses. One day she's singing, and a prince who's just like walking around in the woods hears her and finds the tower. But the day that he finds the tower, the enchantress is already there, and he observes how she gets up. So of course he decides to come back the next day and do the same thing, and essentially tricks the princess into letting her up, or letting him up. So he gets up there and he's like, oh my gosh, you're the most beautiful woman under the sun. Sun, again, in Disney is like the general, like, it's basically the mascot of this movie is this sun emblem. And he says, like, you're so beautiful, I have to marry you. And she's like, I'd love to marry you. But she didn't know how she would get down. So it's something like, come back every day and bring me a strain of silk, and I will start making myself a ladder, and the day that you bring me the last piece I need, then we'll go off together and I'll be yours. He's like, cool, that's great. Now, of course, the enchantress finds out. She cuts off all of Rapunzel's hair, keeps it, and then basically banishes her to live in the desert by herself. So that happens, and then she waits in the tower for the prince to come that night or the next day, I can't remember. So she pulls him up, and basically they get into it, and she pushes him out of the tower. He survives, but he falls on some thorns and like pokes his eyes out. Now, I feel like the poking of the eyes out is like a common theme in the Brothers Grimm, so I don't know if like one of them wore an eye patch or something, but they had to like have their characters lose their sight. Apparently it happens a lot in German folklore. So then, like, because he can't see, he can't really find his way home, so then he starts like wandering for forever. And then years go by, and he came to the desert not knowing Rapunzel was there, but he hears her singing voice and is drawn to her. Apparently she has twins. Somewhere along the lines they were like getting it in, but they didn't include those details before, so I had to do a double take. Like, I actually read it twice to make sure that I didn't miss anything. So she has a boy and a girl. He hears the voice, like, they find each other again. She cries on him, and the tears get in his eyes, and then he can see again, and then happily ever after. So there's a connection there too, with tears in the Brothers Grimm story and in the Disney story, healing the man in distress. So really, long story short, the woman is saving the man in both of these stories. So I'm into that. But that's about it. I mean, the story of Rapunzel we're super familiar with. There wasn't any big surprises here. Really just the eye gouging. Apparently that can't not be in the Brothers Grimm stories. And the unique pulls that Disney's making from the original story to their adaptation. I thought it was really cool. I thought for the most part they kept true to the story, but they also put their own unique spin on it with the lanterns and wanting to see everything. So that's it. That's my magical movie review. I hope you guys enjoyed. We've only got a couple movies left of the original Disney princess films. So we will be seeing you again next Sunday. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and definitely comment below if there's anything that you want to share about your thoughts around the movies. And I will see you next week. Bye-bye, Niti. You're my lantern. Beautiful girl.